My name is Elena Marlowe, and on the morning my confidence was dismantled, I was wearing the only blazer I owned that made me feel like I belonged in rooms with glass walls. It was a Tuesday, 9:12 a.m., 27th floor of the Hawthorne Financial Building, the kind of place where the air smells faintly of espresso, printer ink, and expensive decisions. The quarterly strategy review had pulled in the senior partners, department heads, and one ambitious mid-level analyst who had spent 3 weeks preparing a proposal she believed could change the company's direction. That analyst was me. The screen behind me displayed a title slide: Sustainable Expansion Strategy, Q4 Forward Model, my research, my late nights, my chance. Around the table sat people who controlled budgets larger than my entire neighborhood's annual income. Margaret Liu from finance, who never blinked during negotiations. Peter Hall, head of operations, already checking emails under the table. And at the center, at the head of the glossy black conference table that reflected us like a distorted mirror, sat Daniel Cross, senior strategy director. 45, charismatic, the kind of man whose approval functioned like oxygen in the company. Daniel had been my supervisor for 11 months. I had admired him once. Everyone did. This meeting mattered because the company was considering expanding into emerging regional markets. A move that could either double profits in 3 years or bleed millions if miscalculated. My analysis challenged Daniel's preferred plan. Not recklessly, not emotionally, with data. That was my first mistake. I thought correctness was enough. My palms were damp as I clicked to slide 7, the risk mitigation framework I was most proud of. My voice trembled at first, but steadied as I walked them through projections, supply chain buffers, regulatory timelines. I saw Margaret nod once. Peter stopped typing. For a moment I felt it, that rare professional high when preparation meets opportunity. Then Daniel leaned back in his chair. Leather creaked, a small sound, but in a quiet room, it was thunder. He folded his hands over his stomach, studying me the way someone examines a student who has spoken out of turn. "Elena," he said, smiling, not warmly, but patiently, like an adult indulging a child. "I appreciate the enthusiasm, really, but this model assumes a level of market stability that simply doesn't exist." I opened my mouth to respond. I had sources, contingency layers, footnotes. He raised a hand, still smiling. "This is the difference between academic thinking and real-world strategy." A soft laugh came from somewhere near the end of the table. Someone shifted in their seat. My chest tightened. "We can't base multi-million-dollar decisions," he continued, "on theoretical optimism. You're smart, but this isn't a classroom anymore." The word classroom landed like a stamp on my forehead. Not a colleague, not a strategist, a student, a child playing with adult tools. No one defended me. No one met my eyes. The projector hummed. The city glittered behind the windows, vast and indifferent. In less than 20 seconds, my work and my credibility had been reframed as naive fantasy. I was still standing, still holding the clicker, but the authority had been quietly extracted from my body and placed back at the head of the table where it belonged. "Let's move on," Daniel said lightly, already turning to the next slide, his slide. And just like that, the future I had walked into the room carrying dissolved, leaving only the sound of my own heartbeat and the sudden suffocating awareness that everyone had just witnessed me being put in my place. That was the moment. Not when I left the company, not when I started over, but when I learned how easily a room can decide who you are, and how long it can take to take that decision back. I didn't cry in the elevator. That detail mattered to me at the time, as if dignity could be preserved through technicalities. I stood between two men discussing golf scores, staring at the numbers above the door, ticking down from 27, my reflection faint in the brushed steel walls. My face looked normal, too normal, like nothing had just cracked open inside my chest. The doors opened to the lobby, marble floors, security desk, the faint citrus scent of industrial cleaner. People moved in and out with purpose. The world had not paused to acknowledge my professional death. My badge still worked when I tapped it at the exit gate, That was the cruel part. Humiliation in movies is loud. In real life, it's administrative. By the next week, I noticed the shift. Meetings I used to attend showed up on my calendar as optional, then stopped appearing at all. My manager reassigned one of my projects to streamline workflow. Daniel was polite in the hallway, warm even, like nothing had happened. That was worse. I became professionally invisible, a ghost with a salary. At lunch, conversations dipped when I sat down. Not out of malice, out of caution. No one wants to orbit a falling object. Reputation, I learned, is contagious in both directions. I started eating at my desk. The office noise, keyboards, phones, muted laughter, continued around me like life viewed through thick glass. I answered emails that didn't matter, updated spreadsheets no one opened. My confidence, once a steady internal voice, became a courtroom where Daniel's sentence replayed daily. This isn't a classroom. Academic thinking, theoretical optimism. Each phrase etched deeper. At home, silence waited for me like a witness. My apartment was small, third floor, narrow windows overlooking a brick wall. I used to find it cozy. Now it felt like evidence of limitation. I dropped my bag on the chair and sat on the edge of my bed, still in my work clothes, staring at the wall like it might offer an alternative timeline. I didn't tell my friends the full story. I edited it. Just a tough meeting, some disagreement on direction. You know how corporate politics are. But at night, alone, I replayed every second in brutal high definition. The way his hand lifted to stop me, the laugh, the shift in the room's energy, like watching doors close one by one in a hallway you're still standing in. Sleep came in fragments. I started waking up at 3:17 a.m. every night, heart racing, mind already mid-argument with a memory that could no longer hear me. The worst part wasn't losing status. It was losing trust in my own judgment. I stopped speaking in meetings unless asked directly. I softened my emails, added phrases like, "I might be wrong, but," even when I knew I wasn't. I dressed more conservatively, spoke more quietly, tried to occupy less space, as if competence had been mistaken for arrogance, and I needed to correct the error of being visible. That's what humiliation really does. It shrinks you from the inside first. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. It was raining, not dramatically, just the steady gray kind that makes the city feel tired. I had stayed late, finishing a report that would carry someone else's name. When I stepped outside, I realized I had forgotten my umbrella, so I walked. Water soaked through my shoes within minutes. Cars hissed past on wet asphalt. Neon signs blurred in the puddles. I felt ridiculous, an overdressed, underconfident adult who had somehow misplaced her entire sense of self in a conference room weeks ago. I stopped under the awning of a tiny cafe to check my phone. Inside, a college kid was gesturing wildly over a notebook, arguing with his friend about launching an app. His graphs were crooked. His confidence was uninjured. He believed he could build something. I used to believe that too. And suddenly, standing there dripping onto the sidewalk, I understood something with painful clarity. Daniel hadn't taken my intelligence. He had taken my permission to trust it. And I had handed that permission over without a fight. That realization didn't feel empowering. It felt infuriating. Because if I had given that power away, then maybe, just maybe, I could take it back. That night I didn't make a dramatic life decision. I did something smaller. I opened my laptop, and I started studying again, not to prove him wrong, not yet, but to rebuild the one thing humiliation had cracked. That first night, I told myself I'd study for an hour. Just one. Something manageable. Something that didn't feel like rebuilding a life. Just not giving up on one. The glow of my laptop lit the room blue. Outside, rain tapped against the window like a soft, persistent reminder that the world kept moving, whether I did or not. I opened industry reports I'd once skimmed and actually read them, slowly, carefully, not to impress anyone, not for a meeting, just to understand. Something subtle shifted in that hour. When I closed the laptop, I didn't feel victorious, but I felt like I had placed one brick where a wall had collapsed. So I did it again the next night. And the next. There's a version of self-improvement people like to post about. Sunrise jogs, motivational quotes, dramatic before and afters. Mine looked like this. Microwave dinners. Highlighters drying out. Notes stuck to my fridge. Online lectures playing while laundry spun. I enrolled in courses. Financial risk modeling. Negotiation strategy. Regulatory frameworks. The subjects Daniel had implied were beyond my depth became familiar terrain. I didn't rush. I didn't try to prove anything. I was rebuilding competence the way muscles rebuild after injury. Small strain, recovery, repeat. At work, nothing changed. That was important. No applause, no recognition. I was still sidelined, still background noise in meetings. But now, when I heard flawed assumptions or lazy reasoning, something inside me didn't collapse. It observed. The first time I spoke up again, my voice still shook. It was in a smaller meeting. Vendor logistics. A projection error everyone had glossed over. I think the delay estimates are off, I said, staring at my printed notes instead of faces. The supplier data from Q2 shows a different pattern. Silence. Then Margaret from finance. Precise, unsentimental Margaret said, "She's right. Pull up that data." No one applauded. The meeting continued. But inside me something clicked back into place. Not confidence, not yet. Credibility. With myself. Months passed. My evenings belonged to study. My weekends to freelance analytical projects I picked up quietly through contacts. Small businesses, startups, messy problems with no prestige attached. They paid little, but they gave me something the corporate world had taken. Ownership of outcomes. I saw my work make a difference. A struggling company avoided bankruptcy because of a cost restructuring model I built at my kitchen table. A founder negotiated better terms because I coached her through the numbers. No glass conference room, no leather chairs. Just impact. The real shift happened the day I stopped fantasizing about proving Daniel wrong. I was in a crowded library, sunlight slanting across long wooden tables, papers spread around me like territory. I was working through a complex contract case study when the thought surfaced, calm and unexpected. I don't need his approval anymore. It wasn't anger. It wasn't triumph. It was release. For months my growth had secretly been fueled by humiliation. Now, it had its own engine, mastery. That's when I knew I was changing for real, because revenge burns fast, but purpose sustains. I left the company 3 months later. No dramatic exit, no speech, just a resignation email, and a cardboard box with a plant, a mug, and a notebook filled with everything I had learned in the margins of being underestimated. I started on my own with one client, then 2, then referrals. My desk was secondhand. My office was my living room. But when clients spoke, they listened to me the way rooms used to listen to Daniel. Not because I was louder, because I was precise. And every time I solved a problem others couldn't untangle, a quiet truth settled deeper into my bones. The worst moment of my career had not been the end of my story. Success did not arrive with trumpets. It came disguised as responsibility. By the time the Hawthorne infrastructure case landed on my desk, my practice had grown from a hopeful experiment into something solid. I had a small team, clients who trusted me, a reputation for walking into complex situations and walking out with clarity. The case was sensitive. A mid-sized company was on the edge of collapse after a series of contractual missteps and aggressive expansion. If the restructuring failed, hundreds of employees would lose their jobs. I reviewed the file late into the night. Halfway through page 73 of the primary contract, I saw the name. Chief Strategy Officer, Daniel Cross. I leaned back in my chair. For a moment, the past didn't feel like memory. It felt present. The glass conference room, the laugh. Funny how the mind stores humiliation in high resolution. But alongside it now lived something new. Distance. The first negotiation session was held in a neutral office downtown. Beige walls, filtered water dispenser humming in the corner, the faint scent of stale carpet. Nothing like the polished towers we used to inhabit. Daniel entered with his legal team. He recognized me instantly. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something else. Not arrogance. Relief. That caught me off guard. He looked older. Lines at the edges of his eyes, the kind that don't come from smiling. When introductions circled the table, he said my name carefully, respectfully. "Good to see you, Elena." I nodded. "Let's get started." No performance, no edge in my voice, just work. As discussions unfolded, the situation became clear. His company hadn't collapsed from one bad decision. It was death by 1,000 unchecked assumptions. Overconfidence, rushed expansions, contracts signed under optimism instead of analysis. I knew that pattern. I had lived on the receiving end of it. At one point, Daniel stumbled while explaining a risk exposure clause. Papers shifted slightly in his hands. The room felt familiar in a way that tightened my chest. I could have dismantled him there, politely, legally, publicly, the kind of professional humiliation that leaves no visible mark, but permanently alters how people look at you. No one would have blamed me, but I remembered standing alone in that elevator years ago, telling myself not crying meant I still had dignity. And I realized something. I didn't want to become the kind of leader who needed someone else to shrink. So I said, calmly, "There's another interpretation of that clause. If both parties agree, we can restructure the liability timeline." The room shifted. We worked through the numbers, reframed the risk, built a path forward that protected my client's interests, and kept his company alive. It took hours. It took patience. It took choosing construction over destruction, again and again, in small decisions no one would ever see. After the final session, the hallway was quiet. Daniel approached me alone. "I was wrong about you," he said. No audience, no theatrics, just a tired man telling the truth. I held his gaze. Years ago, I would have needed that apology like oxygen. Now, it felt like a closing bracket in a sentence already finished. "I know," I said gently. We both learned, and for the first time, we stood in the same space, not as superior and subordinate, not as judge and judged, but as two professionals shaped by mistakes. Winning, I learned, is not the moment the room finally sees your worth. It's the moment you no longer need it to. I walked out of that building into late afternoon sunlight, the city loud and alive around me. Cars passed, people hurried. Somewhere, someone else was probably being underestimated in a glass room. I wished I could tell them. The humiliation you survive can become the foundation you build on. Not because pain is noble, but because you get to choose what kind of power grows from it. I chose the kind that lifts. And that choice, more than the success, more than the recognition, is the reason I finally felt like I had won. The apology didn't echo. No one stopped in the hallway. No dramatic music swelled. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like they always had, indifferent to human turning points. But something inside me settled. We shook hands, not as a victor and the defeated, not as a student and a superior, but as two professionals standing on level ground, each marked by experience, each aware that pride can both build and destroy. "I'm glad it was you on this case," Daniel said. Years ago, that sentence would have meant everything. Now, it meant something different. It meant I had become someone reliable in moments of collapse, someone people called when stakes were real, someone who didn't disappear under pressure. And that identity had nothing to do with him anymore. Outside, the air was cool, carrying the faint smell of rain on warm pavement, that soft electric scent the city gives off after surviving a storm. Traffic lights reflected in puddles like scattered constellations. People moved past me, living entire stories I would never know. For a moment, I stood still on the sidewalk. 5 years ago, I had walked out of a building like this, feeling smaller than my own shadow. That day, I walked out feeling aligned. Not inflated, not triumphant, whole. I understood something with a clarity that only time can deliver. Humiliation had been the fire. But I had decided what it forged. It could have hardened me into someone sharp and brittle, someone who mistook cruelty for strength. Instead, it shaped me into someone precise, steady, and when it mattered, generous. That was the real victory. I no longer replayed the conference room in my head as a scene of defeat. Now it was the origin story. The moment the old version of me, the one who believed approval equaled worth, quietly ended. Not destroyed, transformed. Because the day you stop needing the room to validate you is the day you become powerful enough to change what happens inside it. I adjusted my coat, stepped into the moving current of the city, and let the past stay where it belonged. Behind me, useful, no longer heavy. I didn't win because I rose higher than the person who humiliated me. I won because I rose beyond the need to make anyone feel small. And that kind of victory doesn't make noise.